I'm just waiting for it to start and then we'll go. All right, I think we should be ready to go here. So let me open up my presentation here and we'll start with that. All right, you should be able to see my screen right now that says welcome to the MNEV owners meeting. Excellent. Well, welcome to the MNEV owners meeting. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. We will have a really interesting meeting tonight to hear about Passive House and all the things to do with that. We have almost record. This might be the record registration. We have 86 people registered for this one, and usually for our meetings we get 2/3 of them joining. So we'll probably have 60 to 70 people maybe joining us tonight. So that'll be good. So my name is Jukka Kukkonen. I coordinate the Minnesota EV Owners Group, and this is our December meeting. Now we try to meet every month or every second month, depending how things are when we have interesting topics. And of course, we'll be doing probably Zoom meetings during the winter time mostly, and then when the spring comes, we'll hopefully get back to the in-person meetings. So that's the plan right now. Tonight's agenda, we'll start with the opening and doing a little introductions round. Since we have so many people, we will not do introductions for everyone in a big group, but instead we'll do a small group introductions just to give you an opportunity to meet a couple new people or talk with someone who you already might know, but just the opportunity to chat with a few people there. And then we'll jump into the presentation here. We'll have a Tim Ayan talking from principal of TE Studios to talk about EVs and the passive house, especially the passive house thing. Tim is an expert, a really good expert in this area. I've looked at some of his webinars and I really like his approach and all the information that he's sharing. So I look forward to this, and I know that you guys are too. I'm sure you have a million questions, and so you can type them on the chat or save them to the Q&A portion. But Tim will give us a really good tour of what he's doing, explain all the things, explain things from his house too, what's happening there. And so forth. And then we'll close by talking about something. We're not actually to talk about EV market update because that's tomorrow, if you want to join us. But we can talk about upcoming events and other news what everyone wants to share. So that's our plan for tonight. I'll go next to the breakout room introduction. So we'll do that. So I'll put you in a small groups there. We will probably have 4 to 5 people in a group, and first round, just go around this group, just tell what's your name and what EV you drive, if any, and then second round, tell quickly what is the biggest thing that you have done at your house to save energy. What is the most meaningful thing in your mind to save energy in your house? Just kind of like do that, and we'll have 5 minutes for these discussions. So keep that in mind. You have to be pretty short with your stories there to give opportunity for everyone to join there. So I will set up the breakout rooms here. Okay. Let's do that. And assigning automatically, I will create the rooms right now. And I'm opening the rooms, so join the rooms.
I'm on mute. Yuka, I got a question for you. So a question came up in our breakout that there's a meeting tomorrow night. Is there an event or something going on?
Tomorrow there will be the 2022 EV Outlook virtual happy hour, and I will be I'm presenting there. I'm doing this with fresh energy, and I'll be talking about the EV market trends at that event, and I'll provide the sign up link at the end when we're talking about the upcoming events.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Will that be recorded as well tomorrow?
Yes, it'll be recorded.
Because I can't make it, but I want to listen to the recording.
Yep. Well, thank you for joining us back here in a bigger group. I learned a new thing here while we were doing this thing. I learned that the system Zoom automatically when someone joins during this breakout room time, it automatically adds people to the last breakout room. So I was like, okay, so I have to add them, but no, system now automatically does that. So if you ever run breakout rooms, that's the one thing that we learned here today. All right.
Well, I did assign a few people that were just in the main room just now.
So were you doing the assignments or did the system do it?
I did 3 people.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So it was not the system. You need a co-host to do that. And the other thing that we learned here, if you give a co-host rights to people, they can do all kinds of things without you knowing it. So that's another level.
Who needs the system when we've got Lisa?
All right. Excellent. Well, without further ado, I will let Tim to take things from here and start his presentation. So join it. Thank you, Tim, for really coming here, presenting us all about this. For everyone, I would say please hold your questions to the Q&A portion. You can probably put them in a chat too. I'll try to follow chat, but truthfully, I know that the chat gets pretty busy oftentimes, so your questions might be buried under some other things. But of course, you can ask the questions in a chat. If someone knows already answer, they can already answer it. If you don't get it in a chat during the chat time, you can then ask it at the end, or whatever you like. But take it away, Tim.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah. So first of all, share the screen. Let me know if you can see it. I'm going to hit the play button here as well.
We can see it.
Perfect. And I might be looking the other way because I have 2 monitors. I apologize. That doesn't mean I'm not interested in looking at any of you, but it's just how the technology works. And Yuka, thank you so much for inviting me. I greatly appreciate it. I'll talk a little bit about myself here so you can kind of gauge where I'm coming from into this. My name is Tim Ayen. I am an architectural engineer. I was born and raised in Germany, transplant from there to Minnesota some 21 years ago, naturalized American now. And I specialize in something called Passive House, as you can see here on the screen, which we'll do a deeper dive on today. I have a great passion, for all things environment, like many of you probably do too. I took my family to one of the climate strikes here a couple of years back, and we do take that very seriously. And I think as people, we want to be part of the solution and not part of the problem so much. And this is where the Passive House comes in for us on the building side of things. And so I'll try to explain to you how it all works and how it all fits. I've decided to break our evening down into sort of 3 sections here. That's our meal plan for tonight, short of dinner that we're foregoing right now. And I appreciate your attendance. We'll have an appetizer, which is sort of the big picture, why Passive House. We'll have a main course. Well, I'll give you a case study of a Passive House I built for my family. And then our dessert can be the Q&A, and Yuka is helping me manage that so that I can take as many questions as possible. I find that with Passive House, there's usually lots of questions and things that need explanation. So please make a note of what they are, bring them to me, and I'm happy to take as many as I possibly can. So, the big thing here, big picture is, of course, we're under red alert. Those of you following the climate malarkey, the IPCC has been warning us for many years that the ship is sinking and it's accelerating. And, with buildings, we have a pretty big responsibility, depending on the country that you live in. Buildings are anywhere from 1/3 to maybe 2/3 of the problem of energy consumption and carbon emissions. And so that's where it's really important to get on top of what buildings are doing, not just transportation. You can see their climate change scenarios, and the thing that's disheartening when you follow their report over the years is that these curves are just not looking any better, especially the outset right now. We're just not correcting at the level that we should. But I also want to be positive about it and show you one way that we can correct if we set our hearts and minds to it. Another big picture piece is that when you look at climate action globally, we have to look at our individual footprint and average that out for somebody inhabiting spaceship Earth. And there's a group called the 2000 Watt Society that has done that exclusively. They're out of Switzerland, but there is an American branch of it, but be that as it may. And to me, they've sort of defined what I would call the US Climate Olympics. On average, an American sits on 20 tons of carbon emissions a year, and the 2000 Watt Society concluded in their studies that 1 ton is about sustainable. And so that's really where it's at, and we have to figure out how we come to terms with that. So in electricity, currently, in America, we consume about 12,000 watts per person. And as the 2000 Watt Society would have you believe, 2,000 watts is a more realistic, sustainable amount. And in our 12,000 watts here, you can see most of it is still non-renewable and very little of it is clean energy. We're growing that at some pace, but the question is, will we get there before things turn really ugly? Here's a quick overview to kind of picture, how this works in different parts of the world and where we should go. So again, America first on the left, I just showed you that, but Minneapolis and cities in general do a little better. The average continuous energy footprint per Minneapolite is only 8,100 watts, and some fraction of that again comes from clean energy. Now you go across the pond to a city like Munich, you can see it shrinks considerably again. However, they also only have a very small clean energy portion. Across the border in Switzerland, because they have a lot of hydropower, they do a lot better. Same footprint virtually as Munich, but more renewables in the mix. So they already look a lot better. Of course, what we really need to strive for is that tiny little dot on the right-hand side. So 2,000 watts of continuous energy per inhabitant of spaceship Earth is sustainable. 500 can be carbon laden and 1,500 should not be. So that's really where we're headed. Bad news and good news, again, realities, opportunities. As you can see, at 1,500 watts of renewables, we're almost already there. Because in the United States today, we consume about $12.50 per person in that way. So ultimately, if we can conserve properly, we don't actually need a much larger green grid. So there's also some good news here. So, and one of the questions we have to ask ourselves, if you're a legislator or a mayor or a governor or president, how do we want to invest into the future of this country and our people? So we can do it in two ways generally. We can substitute and try to make all of this energy that we consume in a green way. That's a huge investment. Or we can try to replace all the wasteful energy use with efficiency and get rid of it. We can look at sufficiency and how much of anything do we need in our lives and maybe find some savings there. And then the rest of it, again, can come from clean energy. So this is a general discussion that we should all be having. And, obviously our elected officials have to conquer and ultimately lead on. When we're talking about buildings, there's one big elephant in the room. And I know from talking to EV owners, people who have PV systems on their roofs, this is something that a lot of people very quickly overlook. When we look at the energy footprint, especially here in Minnesota, our biggest energy expense is actually not in electricity, which is the easy one to get green, but it is in natural gas, because we have just massive heating loads. And where are they coming from? Well, they're coming from our buildings. So that is really what we need to conquer. And the bad news with gas is there's really not a good replacement for it on the horizon that makes it completely climate gas neutral. And the way that the building industry has tried to tackle this historically over the last 30, 40 years here in this country is, if you take the status quo on the left, we build buildings with minimal amounts of insulation and all kinds of other bypasses, leaks and whatnot, and we stuff a big mechanical system in it. And, I show the tent in jest, but there's a lot of reality, in this. There's a lot of uninsulated buildings in Minnesota, in Minneapolis in particular. I do work here. I've been in tons of homes that have no insulation in them. And so the market then responds with, well, we got to do better. So let's put some solar panels on it, which is the tent on the right. So we really haven't fixed the problem with the building, but we've put an alternative energy source on the roof. And here's where a lot of the misunderstandings come in. I find that most of the populace around me thinks that with some solar panels on the roof, they can wipe out their entire either energy footprint or carbon footprint. And I couldn't be further from the truth. Most people struggle on their own roof to break even with their electricity bill, let alone the heating and hot water energy use. And so this is really questionable, if this incrementalism approach is ever going to get us to a substantial leap in buildings that'll push us in the right direction. And so coming from that, I also do a little bit of policy work. When you look at Minneapolis or Minnesota as a state, the plan right now in Minnesota is really to substitute, right? So you see this graph with the massive heating load. This is all our energy that we consume in Minneapolis over the course of the year. You get the month on the bottom and the amount of energy per month plotted on this graph. So we have an issue here where, right now our electricity companies are already struggling with a hot summer day in the middle there somewhere to get on top of a cooling load peak. Now imagine what they'll do when we all switch to electric furnaces in January, as you can see on that graph. It's insurmountable. And then on top of it, we all want to drive electric cars. And then we want to fast charge them. You can start to get a picture of, what the dilemma is. So the current clean energy plan for a state like Minnesota, which is substitution, electrify everything, simply doesn't work. We don't have the electric capacity to do that. We don't have seasonal storage. There's a whole slew of issues that isn't really solved for this kind of approach. And the smorgasbord that I'm faced with in my job on a daily basis is that, again, people think, oh, some solar panels on the roof will surely fix it. And then we'll talk about net zero this and net zero that, and a high efficiency furnace and a high efficiency AC. And I can tell you from, sort of field notes, what I've learned in over 20 years of practice in Minnesota, none of these things are going to get us to carbon neutrality in the built environment, which again, locally is about half of all the emissions that we're facing. So there's a lot of great ideas and they all have their place. Don't get me wrong. We need to do all those things too. But there's also, unfortunately, a lot of greenwashing in the sense that we're constantly being told everything will be fine. The track that we're on will lead to success when practitioners like myself and my colleagues in the field see that that simply isn't going to work. And so the impression and the reason why I want to talk to you about conserving energy in a home setting like a passive house is that we cannot solar panel our way out of this. It simply isn't going to work. We need much better buildings and much better building envelopes in particular. So now you may sit there and think, dang it, what are we going to do about that? Well, you're an EV owner, so you already know the solution to this problem. And I've alluded to that a little bit, right? So my little funny picture here, will you get me a jacket? And then we got Will Steger on the other side, little hat tip to the local explorer. But this is a really key graphic for our evening here tonight. What we're currently building looks more like the guy on the left. What we should be building is what Will Steger is wearing on the right. We need to put a proper winter coat on our buildings, and we're not doing that just yet. And as an EV owner, you know that, and you experience that every day, because an electric motor converts 85% of energy into mechanical energy, whereas a gas combustion engine maybe can do 40, and that's, I think, already being very kind. So efficiency is really the name of the game. The more efficient we can be, the less energy we need to do exactly the same thing. So that's really what it comes down to. I simulated that for the city of Minneapolis in a study that I did for them. And if you remember the graph from before, which sort of ghosted in the background, if we apply something like the Passive House Building Energy Standard I'll be talking about tonight to our built environment, you see where that heating load peak from January went, it all but disappeared. So we can package in buildings and make that go away to a point where our current infrastructure has a fighting chance to get on top of it. So in other words, the Passive House can be a solution or part of a set of solutions to get us to climate neutrality. And by the way, it delivers a host of other benefits, along the way. This is my home. I'm going to talk about that tonight. So I'll give you previews of the finished product here interspersed with what I'm talking about. So this is what a passive solar home in Minnesota could look like. I prefer modern architecture. It doesn't have to look like that, but mine looks like that. The answers for buildings are really, really simple and basic. This is kind of a joke in our internal circles again. To make such a high-performing building, it really doesn't take very much at all. We're not waiting for a big Tesla market disruptor type technology. We use insulation. We use more of it. We seal buildings up tightly. That's tapes, caulks, sealants, readily available at any home improvement store. We do something called the avoidance of thermal bridges, which in layman's terms, the best way to describe that to you means if you go outside on a cold winter day and you take your winter jacket and you rip the arm off and you let your naked hand and arm dangle out, that's a thermal bridge, right? Now you got a part of yourself out in the open, and that cold's gonna creep up your arm under your jacket and make you cold. Buildings are riddled with this kind of stuff. So we have to design them in a way where they don't have components that nilly-willy traverse what we call the shell, the building envelope, and basically have fingers sticking out that constantly get cold. And then on top of it, we need a really good window. Ideally, in our cold climate zone, it's something that doesn't just insulate well, but also lets a lot of sun in, especially on the south side, so that it can give us some free heat. And then last but not least, when we air seal the building, we need that heat recovery ventilator you see there on the left-hand side, sorry. And that will bring you fresh air with heat recovery, day and night, so that you can breathe. So these are the easy answers. No market disruption needed, all readily available in the marketplace. And with that, I'm going to play back a quick video where somebody summarizes the entire concept in 90 seconds. So just bear with me here, I'll start that.
Passive House explained in 90 seconds. Does your house have a heater in the basement or maybe a fireplace? Probably also a central air conditioner or maybe a window unit. Did you ever wonder if it was necessary? In 1991, Dr. Wolfgang Feist built the first passive house in Germany based on research from all over the world. Here's what he did. 1. Proper insulation. It's just like wearing the right winter jacket. It also doesn't need a heater. 2. No air leakages. There should be no holes small or large to let warm air out of the house. 3. No thermal bridges. A thermal bridge is like a road for heating energy in which warmth can travel right through your walls. As a matter of fact, most of our houses have thermal highways in our walls where heat can easily travel to the outside. Plus, the house needs proper windows, most of the time with triple pane glass, and it needs to be oriented properly so the sun can heat it in the winter and the shade is provided in the summer. And it uses an HRV, a device that provides the inside with fresh air without letting the heat out. Add all these things up, and it turns out your house doesn't need a heater or an air conditioner. So where does the heat come from? A passive house needs 90% less energy, and that can easily be supplied by your body heat, the sun, your appliances, light bulbs, and even your TV. This saves you a lot of money on your heating bill and helps preserve the environment.
Did we make it in 90 seconds?
So there it was. All right, so basically a quick recap of what I said. For those of you who prefer a graphic, here's a quick graphic that shows these 5 key components again. And I will put one little caveat over the top of this lovely little video, and that is in Minnesota, because of our weather extremes, we do need a little bit of a heater, and we also do need a little bit of an air conditioner. So in a moderate Central European climate where this at one point originated, you can basically heat and cool with the ventilation system, no additional systems needed. In Minnesota, we need a little bit more. But to put that in perspective, the house that I live in is just over 2,000 square feet. And on the coldest day of the year at about -25 outside, I can heat my house with 2 hair dryers going at the same time. So you get an order of magnitude there. So I still have a heating and a cooling system, but they are very, very small. So then, in the vein of what is the potential of this? You as EV owners, you can see about 50% savings in energy and emissions over ICE engines. And in Passive House, when we apply it to new construction code buildings, we're typically seeing above 50% improvement on the overall energy consumption and footprint. And when we retrofit older buildings, we generally see over 80% savings in that particular case, with extremes landing over 90% on some completely uninsulated buildings that we've worked on. I also want to give you a quick update on a better path, I think a better path. I did some work with the city of Vancouver some years ago, and they are doing a track of sufficiency, efficiency plus renewables. So, the conventional pathway of extracting energy and creating a bunch of emissions to satisfy our needs for light and heat and hot water, they looked at that and they said, that's just not sustainable. We got to come up with a better system there. So what I told you before, we still need renewables here. So we can use hydro, we can use the sun, we can use wind to power a bunch of stuff, but then immediately you run into this issue of, well, there's just not enough of that to go around, and the sun doesn't shine at night, and the wind doesn't always blow. How do we deal with that? And so Vancouver understands that and got on this track of, well, we got to compact our energy footprint of the built environment so that those things overlap much better. And so the transition that Vancouver is currently undergoing can be summarized in this graph. They did ladder up to the 2000 watt society approach, and their current energy breakdown, 2010 energy breakdown of fossil fuels and that sort of a thing, is impacted by both compacting the pie chart to begin with, and then making sure that all of it comes from renewables. And for the built environment, Vancouver has decided they're going to use the Passive House Building Energy Standard, and so that's taken from their website. So they currently have programs in place so that new construction is done in this way, as does the city of New York and some other places throughout the country here. So the key messaging from my first section here for you tonight is that efficiency is the first renewable energy. And if we use that wisely, in the case of a building, we're looking at Passive House, this building energy standard I'll be talking more about tonight. Then we partner that with another thing I haven't gotten into yet, which is embodied carbon. So using materials that have a small energy and carbon footprint. And only after we've done that do we electrify everything. So the notion of electrifying everything is still right, because that's the fuel we understand how to make in a green way. So that's correct, but we need to compact ourselves first before we do it, and then we can fuel it all with clean energy and get to the meaningful climate action. So that's my appetizer for you to sort of embed the whole conversation of why do we need to make substantially better buildings. For those of you who want to follow up, I'm not going to leave this up a long time here, but there's some links that I can send out later. There are some good articles on that. Transport and building emissions aren't separate. It's another sort of rabbit hole of, we live here, we work there. Is that really an efficient way to go about life? With COVID, that's actually changed perhaps for the better for many of us with work from home. But that's another discussion worth having. And then some good resources for you would be things like Lloyd Alter's book here, Living the 1.5 Degree Lifestyle. And there's another wonderful article here by Alex Steffen, My Other Car is a Bright Green City, talking about the importance of also making green buildings and making, again, this sort of work live balance properly so that we don't waste a ton of trips all the time. So that's my opener. Yuka, if you want, if there's already burning questions, I'm happy to take a couple now before I get into the case study.
No, I don't see any burning questions yet, so just
Perfect.
keep going.
All right. Quick transition. Boom. So we'll talk a little bit more about the house. We gave our house a name. It's called the Good Energy House. And that was done on purpose because, again, we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And so we want to look at energy not as the problem in the room, but something that can also be good. You're looking at the front facade of my house. So this is the front entry here. It's covered. I have an attached garage with a garage door that you can barely see. I don't want everybody to look at the house and think that I live in a garage, but wanted to detract from that a little bit. And I made this canopy so that people can arrive safely in any kind of weather. We have 0-step entries. And these are all just ideas that I do practice as an architect to make sure that buildings are valuable to their inhabitants and to future generations. So building in an accessible way is important to us. Also, utilizing earth-friendly building materials. We could talk about that more. It's not going to be my main focus today, but I use a lot of either recycled materials or natural materials where I can in my architecture to further enhance the whole value proposition. And some of it you see in this image here. For Minnesotans, because we care about water quality, I will also have you know that we have stormwater managed the entire site. Just to the left here, it was just coming in at the time, is a giant rain garden. There's one in the front and the back, and we are proud to capture all of our stormwater on site and infiltrate. This is the rear three-quarter shot of the building. And this is important already because it shows my south facade, which is the right-hand side. And on this side, you can see more glass. There's a little bit on the west as well here, but that's really our solar collector for the house. That's where the free heat comes in, but more on that in a minute. We did this house in partnership with a bunch of people, and so I always let these slides go through here just to kind of, bring some names up because nothing happens in a vacuum in this world. And I work very closely with the city of Minneapolis on projects. We have ongoing, actually, affordable housing projects in Minneapolis that are built to the Passive House standards. We have some phenomenal suppliers. Some of these people have come into the market here with product for Passive House when there really wasn't a market. And so I deal with a lot of people who have a lot of faith in other people doing the right thing and making good choices. And so I just want to give them a brief plug here without calling everybody out, but just know that nothing good ever happens in an entire vacuum. Also wanted to let you know that we have a Minnesota Passive House practitioner organization, and there's also a North American national organization. So if anybody wants to do a deeper dive, wants more resources than you can shake a stick at, feel free to look up any of these organizations and reach out or reach back out to me. I'm also a firm believer in public education, and so I've done countless tours and talks on the subject in my career, including here when my own house was under construction. I've led thousands of people literally through buildings that I've designed. And I think it is so important, and I really appreciate you taking the time tonight to learn about a better way to build. So let me give you a rundown of the build. Sit back and enjoy the show. So I'll show you how this thing works under the hood. First of all, we're in Minneapolis, Minnesota, crazy place, right? Everybody wants to build here because our weather and our climate is just nuts. We have really hot and humid and really cold and dry. And so I say that in just a little bit, but it is one of the more exciting places literally on the planet to build because few places have the extremes like we do. And that makes something like a high performance home or high performance building exciting to build here. I live in Northeast Minneapolis. And my family and I were fortunate enough to be able to buy a property on the same street where we had lived for 18 years. The property was completely dilapidated. And while this doesn't really matter for the Passive House, it's part of our story. And so I'm going to show you just a couple of pictures here. We're also on a little footpath that is sort of It connects a few blocks up here where I live, and it's sort of a unique item, right? You can have people walking by, go on walks. That's not typical, and actually, we really enjoy that. We enjoy meeting people that way and waving to them and saying hi. When we bought the property, it was completely run down. Unfortunately, it was still inhabited, and there's a longer story that I won't share tonight. But this is not entirely uncommon. I've seen other houses like that, and I just want to remind you to keep an eye on your neighbors, because there are people out there who live in conditions like that and that need desperate help. And so think of them, especially as the weather turns. The house that we purchased, it wasn't really sold as a home. It couldn't be legally. It needed to be demolished. So I'll give you a quick track of how quickly a home goes down. 1970s or early 80s construction, the whole building was disposed of in less than an hour. There's not a lot of girth to how most of what we build is actually built. The foundation took just about as long to pull out as the house did to demolish. So then we started from a clean slate, more or less. We had the good fortune of being able to acquire a double lot, so it's 80 feet. And I'm looking at it on the east side, to the left is south, and there's not a lot of obstructions, which is wonderful for a passive solar design, and part of the reason why this property appealed to us. Let's kind of browse through a couple more pictures here. So the first thing you have to understand is when you're building a passive solar structure, the orientation of it really, really matters. And so what I have here is a site plan, a typical site plan. And in red, you can see the footprint of the old home that sat on the property. And you can see it was an east-west facing home, which a lot of neighborhoods in Minneapolis have. Well, that's not great for passive solar design, because now the long facades face east and west, where the sun rises and sets, but it doesn't shine for most of the day. And so that's not really great. And the old home to boot had the garage on the south, so it didn't have any windows there. So the first thing that we do on a lot of urban sites in particular when we develop them is that we turn the whole layout. So my house now sits, basically 90 degrees turned, so that the long side of it faces south, and I have the maximum capacity for bringing in free heat. For those of you who can read a plan, here is the first floor plan. It is an all open floor plan. The entry is on the right-hand side, the east side. You come in, there's a stairwell and a bedroom on the main floor, 3/4 bath. And as you come in, there's sort of a great room with a kitchen towards the back. And in the middle of the whole thing is a mudroom to the garage. So it's a very functional, nicely flowing floor plan. And then on the west side, on the left-hand side, is an outdoor space. And the whole back end of it is glass. Here's a couple of pictures of what that looks like in the flesh. That was before winter hit. And then when we come up to the second floor, I'll start at the stair again. You come up to a landing. There's a hallway on the south side, the bottom here of this drawing. There's a couple of kids' bedrooms where my girls live. They have a bathroom across the hall. And then next to that is our laundry room upstairs on the second floor. That also has our ventilation system in it. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then from there, there's a little balcony space, and then our master suite with a little walk-in closet and bedroom. So it's a fairly compact home, 2,100 feet on those two floors. There isn't a basement. We didn't want a basement. So a couple more impressions. That's our second floor balcony. Actually, right now, that is holding my other daughter's drum kit, which is just a joy. She's pretty good. So when she goes at it on the second floor there, it's enjoyment for the whole house. Our bedroom upstairs. So all in, just nicely appointed spaces. So from there, let me tell you what we did under the hood. How did we do it? What did we build here? Kind of make that out in the background. The weather blanket, cellulose insulation. We used lots of it. We literally used truckloads of it. So I don't expect you to read all this out, but I'll paint a picture. This is a section, an architectural drawing from the footer all the way up to the roof itself. And we insulated all of it. We insulated around the entire foundation system. The building sits on insulation. We insulated under the slab. We built a double stud wood wall. Both cavities are insulated. And then we have a roof system that is fully insulated. And to put that in perspective, everything that sits in the ground is at about 2 to 3 times the code required levels of insulation. The same would be true for the main floor walls. When we get to the roof, Minnesota roofs per code are fairly well insulated. We're looking at only about 80% more insulation than what code would require. But in general, it would be fair to assume that you're installing about 2 to 3 times as much insulation into a passive house as you would be to a code normal building. And then on top of it, we have these fantastic passive house windows, which provide the R value about of a 2x4 insulated wall, but at the same time have a solar heat gain coefficient of over 50%, which means over 50% of the sun's energy that hits the glass is invited in and locked into our building. And about 70% of all the heating need that this house has is delivered for free by the sun. So then let's build it from the ground up, right? First thing is you dig a hole for the foundation. Again, this doesn't have a basement, so you see these sort of trenches outlining, that's where the foundation itself for the building went. Then you put a crushed rock down. This is all standard stuff. I won't dwell on it. This is where it starts to get exciting. So we use EPS foam insulation at a certain compressive strength to set the whole building down on top of. So you can see the outline now of the exterior walls being formed from this stuff. It's 4 inches thick. And then we take more of it and we create sort of a bumper. So rather than pouring a piece of concrete and then trying to figure out how to insulate it, we actually learned over the years we can build the form from the foam. And then we go about it in a conventional fashion, put the rebar, the metal in it and all that, and then we float it with concrete and boom, there is an insulated foundation right there that we can now build the whole house on top of, and the thing is completely packaged up. From there, we have stem walls. So these are sort of half walls. In Minnesota, you have to, depending on where you are, go 3.5 to 5 feet down and then build back up. So we have walls that we need to set on top of this. We used insulated concrete forms, which look almost like a Lego block, but they're hollow in the middle. Foam on both sides connected with a piece of plastic or a series of little plastic connectors. And you just basically stick these things together and build up a wall out of it. You end up putting steel, rebar back into that as well. And then you order up the concrete truck and they fill the whole cavity full of concrete. And so this does 2 things really well. Because it's an engineered system, it can be thinner than freestanding concrete walls. So we don't use so much concrete, which has a huge energy footprint. We use a lot less. And then secondly, we already get a good insulating value out of this wall. So that means that we have essentially a skirt all around our building that keeps the frost out. So when it's all said and done, it looks something like this. So we got the sandwich here with that floated interior concrete piece and then foam on the inside, foam on the outside. And for passive house, we needed more insulating value. So we clad it again with more foam. And I say foam, that's one product that is readily available here in Minnesota and useful in this application, but there are other products. And there's actually some new stuff coming out that is perhaps a little bit less environmental impact and does the same thing, but I digress. On the inside of the footer, you can see there was a little concrete still left exposed on top. So we even cover that up with foam panels. So the entire thing is packaged up and completely disconnected from the ambient air and dirt. And then we waterproof it. Nothing too exciting here. There's waterproofing stucco products out there that get troweled on this. So essentially what we've built now, and this would be the same if you had a basement versus what I'm doing here, but we have a completely fully insulated, waterproofed, sealed up building envelope that with ground contact that can go in the ground. So after that's done, it gets backfilled inside and out. And then some of the utilities go in, the plumbing has to go in, nothing too extraordinary here. And from there, we can move on to building the first floor walls. So we decided to go for a wood wall because that's a very environmentally friendly. Wood stores CO2, so building with wood is fantastic. And we made basically prefabricated wall panels on site and then craned them up to where they needed to be. And this is really no different than most home builds that you'll see. With the exception, our studs are a little bigger. We use 2x8s, and also we framed them only 24 inch on center, not 16. And what that does is it gives us more cavity for insulation and less of the wall is wood. Why would you do it? Well, insulation, as the name has it, insulates really well. wood is not the greatest insulator. So we want to minimize the amount of wood in the wall and maximize the amount of insulation. So you can see that all coming together. Things that start to appear, that black tape you see on those green panels, part of our air sealing system. So we use the first layer of sheathing to air seal the building. And so everything is seam taped there to make sure that the building doesn't leak anything in or out. These are just framing impressions, nothing much to see here. But you can, in this picture here, you can really see the air sealing coming to bear. And this product, if some of you have seen this in a different context, don't be confused. This paneling that we're using here is sometimes used as exterior sheathing and weather barrier. We're using it purely to air seal the house. And we're doing that on this in this layer so that we're not relying on a plastic membrane, which commonly in normal houses, you know, people would put plastic on the inside of the studs, staple that up, and then drywall over the top of it. We wouldn't want to rely on that because every time somebody puts a picture on the wall or hangs a shelf, they'll put a hole in that system and it will stop working properly. So we air seal this sheathing, which is about 8 inches in from the inside of the wall. And the chances of anybody ever wrecking this layer or compromising it are near nil. And that's, again, the appeal for us. So a couple more framing impressions here of that tape and those tape connections going up. So then we get to our secondary wall. Most wood construction passive house in a cold climate will be double wall construction. And what we do here is we simply hijack what otherwise would be floor or roof trusses, and we bolt them up the face of the building, and that makes another cavity. And we can get these in different depths, so we can dial this in specifically to meet our energy targets. And in this case here, we had a 2x8 wall, so the structural layer is about 8 inches, and we put 10-inch I-joist, as these things are called, on the face of it. So the structure of my house is 18 inches thick, and all of it is insulated. So you could see a little bit more here, what's going on there with those things going up all the way around. So we have now 2 cavities that we can fill. So the next thing is roof goes on. We have a low sloped roof. It's not a flat roof. That's a misnomer. All perceived flat roofs have a slope to them, and they drain to what's called scuppers. Sort of see them here on this aerial shot. But at this point, effectively, we have sealed up the building enough so we can start thinking about putting in windows and other things. And we built this in the summer of 2019, which was an extremely wet summer for any of you who remember that. So this system was put to the test immediately and often. And then once this box was up, we also looked at putting in the slab. And so in Minnesota, we have, first of all, a radon ordinance. We have to put radon mitigation systems in place per code. And to do that properly, you fill up the area, whether this is a basement slab or first floor, it doesn't matter, with rock, basically just gravel. And then into that goes a radon system. I'm not dwelling on that here. And then from there, we're filling it in with EPS foam once again, because it has ground contact. It has to be a material that can stand that sort of condition. And in our case, we used 8-inch panels. For most of my projects, these will be 6 to 10-inch panels, depending on how we energy or what the energy model tells us is needed. That system also wants to be completely sealed up for a number of reasons. We don't want air leaking in. We don't want air leaking out. We don't want moisture. And perhaps most importantly, we don't want soil gases like radon and other gases that might bubble up from the earth. And so we take great care in sealing the building up on the bottom as well. Then metal goes in similar to our concrete poured walls. And then the concrete truck shows up and the slab is floated. And boom, we got a concrete floor. And from there, then we can progress and put windows in. You saw this picture before. Most of the windows that we use in North America right now, especially in the cold climate zones for passive houses, are still made in Central Europe. They come out of Eastern Europe or Central Europe. We have not been able to convince American window manufacturer to make a window at this level of performance. There are a couple of companies in the country that assemble windows like this, but they don't entirely manufacture them. And without going too deep down that rabbit hole, it is because some of the components that make up a window are not readily available or companies, suppliers don't want to make them readily available because they don't perceive the market for the product to be strong enough to warrant that yet. So be that as it may, a lot of these things ship in a shipping container, which happens for a lot of things in our daily lives right now as it is. So it's less exciting than you might think. They do get kind of heavy, I will say that. So the big window in my house is about 18.5 feet tall. It came in 2 sections. What you're seeing here is the upper section of that window. And a unit like that is going to be hundreds of pounds. And so in a high location, it takes some gear to get it up there and get it in, which, you know, quite honestly, that was exciting, but it was also done in about 20 minutes. So it's not like something that is insurmountable. And then with windows in, now we got the building envelope, you know, sealed up, weather is staying out, we can start insulating. And to bring the embodied energy footprint down of the whole operation, when you're using lots of insulation, it makes sense to go for something that has very little embodied energy. And we're using cellulose in this case. And you can see there's 3 trucks sitting here. We probably went through maybe 10 of these trucks to insulate this house. This stuff is pumped in. It is compacted and pressurized into the cavities. I've noticed that some people think cellulose doesn't work because it settles. And that is, if it settles, it was a faulty install. Cellulose is always to be compacted into cavities, and it's pressurized, and it makes effectively a custom bat. And it doesn't settle in that state. So I can give you that peace of mind for what it's worth if anybody has had bad experience with cellulose. This is our roof. Looking at it from the underside, we're using a air barrier product up here, which is a reinforced membrane. This is also back in our assembly. You can't quite see it here yet, but our ceilings are actually suspended down for the same reason that I gave you in the wall. We want to make sure when electrics are run, lights are installed, that we're not constantly poking through the air barrier and the roof. And so our ceiling is actually suspended about 6 or 7 inches down from this plane that you're looking at here. But this is the roof cavity itself, which is then also dense packed with the cellulose. And cellulose, for those of you who don't know what that is at all, it's essentially recycled paper. And the only treatment that this product has gotten is a salt bath. And that is, the salt helps make the cellulose last. It keeps vermin out, it keeps bacteria and mold and other things out. It makes it very resilient to both fire and water. And that's what makes it useful. And the process of that is literally just, you know, taking a bath in a salt brine. And so this is about as low of an embodied energy footprint as you can get in insulation. You can see the ceiling cavity is fully pressurized here, so it's loaded. Same with the walls. This is the interior cavity, the 2x8 stud walls of the house. They install a sort of fabric mesh just to kind of compact the material into these cavities because drywall isn't up yet. Then later this all gets covered, obviously, with the drywall. And then this is at the rim joist. That's the area between the 2 stories of the house. It also gets this netting installed, and then the cellulose is pumped into the netting, and that rim joist area is filled up. This is a shot of our garage, which has a slightly different wall makeup, but similar idea. We're using this air membrane material here for a number of reasons, but again, we're just pumping the material in. And then from the outside, the building actually had building paper on already. They cut little portholes and then insulated through that whole system into that cavity and filled it all the way up. And so you can't really see it very well, but every stud wall cavity has one of those little portholes, which were later seam taped shut. Another big part of Passive House is building airtightly. Maybe just a quick backup. Why would you build airtight? Very simply because leaking air in and out is one of actually the biggest waster of energy in our parts. Traditionally, homes were built very leaky, and so a lot of energy simply just escapes the building. You remember my picture of the tent, and we don't want to do that. So we have to have a controlled volume, and we do that by seam taping it, sealing it, and then testing it. And that is done with actually an invention from our area. Gary Nelson, the Energy Conservatory, was one of the first company to sell a blower door, which is what you see here. Those of you who have done in the past an energy audit will perhaps have had somebody come out with a device like this And what this does is it pressurizes and depressurizes your home and takes a reading. And it gives us an indication of how well sealed up, how well the building is sealed up. So you can see that in action here. We use often in construction a little bit of smoke as a sort of a tracer gas. And what that does is you can see our spotter on the outside of the glass. If we pressurize the building and we flood the building with smoke, we can visually very quickly see if we have a leak somewhere and fix that. I don't know if any of you have ever done a blower door test or know anything about the metrics. Minnesota Building Code has us build buildings at 3 air changes at 50 pascals pressure, 3.0. My house on the first attempt blew a 0.36, meaning this house, even in its rough state, was already 10 times tighter than the Minnesota Building Code prescribes, which goes back to my comment that our codes are woefully inadequate for how we should be building. From there, let's segue into mechanicals. So I have my mechanicals on display. If it weren't COVID, I'd be happy to have you all here. I've had some small tours, and if anybody wants to see this in the flesh in the future, just ping me and we can see if we can get that set up safely. But we put it on display because we want people to understand what we're doing here. And also in Passive House, the mechanicals are generally fairly small. And so we can hide them in all kinds of places if we want to. So in my mudroom, which is what you're looking at here, you'll see in a minute, I have my water heater and my heat pump system. We use an air-to-air heat pump for heating and cooling of the home. And we also have an air-to-water heat pump system for hot water. I'll start with that here on the left-hand side in the next shot. So on the left-hand side, that machine effectively works like an air conditioner in reverse, and it funnels air from inside my home through the air conditioner core, which then turns that into heat and into hot water. And then cold air is expelled out of that port that you're looking at right on the front there. So the exhaust air is about 45 degrees. Maybe 50, somewhere in there, which is great in the summer. It's basically free air conditioning and some dehumidification. In the winter, my heater has to work a little harder to compensate for that, but that's readily available technology. On the right-hand side, you see what I labeled HAC. That's a heating and air conditioning heat pump. And this is the indoor unit. The black box in particular has the core of it in there. And that talks to an outdoor unit. And so here we're making heat, we're making cold. There's some dehumidification that happens here. And for all intents and purposes for you guys, this works just like a furnace that you already know and are aware of probably, but it is entirely electric. There's no gas hookup at the site for anything. And it works with the efficiency of a heat pump. And these air conditioning heat pump systems have that benefit that, in the right conditions, they can get multiple units of heat for 1 unit of energy that goes into the system. And that's why everybody's screaming heat pump right now when we talk about how to make buildings more efficient. We also have a standalone ventilation system. I talked about as that being one of the pillars of Passive House. I'll give you the graphic of the house real quick so I can tell you how it works in principle. The machine brings in air from the outside. In the winter, it pre-warms it with the outgoing exhaust air. In the summer, it pre-cools it. And then from there, we put it in all the spaces that are marked in red. So my living room, my dining room, the spare bedroom, the mudroom in this case, they get a supply of fresh air. From there, the fresh air meanders to the spaces that have humidity, odors in it, like my kitchen and my bathroom. That's where we have exhaust. And so the machine pulls from those spaces and then expels that to the outside. So none of the air inside of my home is recycled. It comes in from the outside, we breathe it, and within a couple of hours, it gets expelled back to the outside. That's in principle how this works. The second floor, similarly, we have supplies in all the bedrooms, and then the exhausts are in the bathrooms and in the laundry room. It's as simple as that. The whole thing is home run. On the left-hand side, you can see the spaghetti of the tubing that is used to connect it, about 3-inch diameter tubes. And they go from the machine location, which is what we're looking at, to these different locations throughout the building. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the air intake and exhaust through the sidewall of the house. There's, of course, filtration, must not forget that. So we filter with an F7 filter or a MERV 13 thereabouts. So we can, and this could be dialed up and dialed down to your liking. But it is just phenomenal. And I've lived with this type of system for many years in my old home too. The amount of crud that filters out of air that we're not breathing and not bringing into our home is just stunning, especially when we go through wildfire season. You don't know what you're doing to yourself until you empty a filter after wildfire season and you see how much creosote and black stuff gets filtered out in there. On the right-hand side in the little corner, ceiling register. So that's just a box, right, in one of the rooms for an exhaust or a supply. Here's the machine itself. It looks or has the size of a mini fridge, roughly. Most of the time it's mounted to a wall. You can put it on a stand, but it's very compact. That black thing in the middle there folds down. Behind it are the filters. You can take them in and out and change them. I can stretch my filters easily for 6 to 12 months with little light vacuuming every once in a while, depending on the year, of course. When we get really bad wildfires, I might have to burn up a few more. And on the right-hand side at the top, you can see the manifolds. There's one of these metal boxes for supply, one for return. They're back to back, so you're only looking at one. And then on top of that, you can see those tubes now fully connected for supply and return. So this is what's called an HRV or ERV. The difference being heat recovery ventilator, the first version only recovers heat, and ERV has enthalpy recovery, meaning it also does moisture recovery. And we have one of those systems in our home. And what that means is in the winter, it'll keep more humidity in the home. And in the summer, it'll reject more humidity to the outside. And so that means while it's not actively humidifying or dehumidifying, it's creating a better balance for us so that we maintain more steady humidity levels in the home. Some of this stuff gets really technical, so I'll skip over these also in the interest of time here. Just some images from the field. So the unit itself, will take up the exhaust from the kitchen as shown here. Our range hood in the kitchen is a recirculating hood. So it has a grease filter and a carbon filter, and then it spits the air back into the room, and the whole room is ventilated with the help of the system. We also don't have any bath fans because the whole system takes care, or whole house system takes care of the bath ventilation. There really aren't any exhaust-only devices in our home, simply because they wouldn't work because we live in an airtight building.
Tim, one thing here, don't skip any technical details because that's what this group lives by. So any technical details, always tell everything.
Okay, that one, that had more of a matrix of how the thing is wired. And I don't want to exclude anybody here, but I'm also trying to be mindful of the time here. And so I'm happy to go back there if somebody wants more info on the ventilation system. So thank you though, Yuka. All right, so a couple of registers here, and in our return air register, we have an additional filter to keep the system clean. And I find that useful, but not all of my clients do that, but it picks up a lot of additional stuff that otherwise might find its way back to the machine. I was talking about not having any exhaust-only devices, and here's another example of that. We use an electric heat pump dryer. So this is an exhaust-less dryer or vent-less dryer. And that is great in a passive house because, again, we're not pulling anything in, we're not sending anything out. And what this machine does is it condenses with the help of a heat pump the water out of the clothes and actually puts it down the same drain where the washer drains. And not only are these machines great for a passive house because of the airflow, they also are very, very energy efficient compared to conventional dryers. And so I actually measure everything. You'll see this a little later here. And I was able to find that this dryer, for everything it does, uses the same energy as my old dryer used just to spin the drum. So to put that in perspective. From there, it's an easy segue to air quality. I monitor air quality in my home. I encourage my clients to do the same thing. So here you can see the device, the AirThings device that we use for that. We monitor for radon, VOCs, CO2, humidity, temperature, and pressure. The first 5 are the most important ones. The pressure, I don't know really what to do with it. But the good news, and I'm happy to report that after we've been in this house about a year and a half, these values are just about where they've been. And so we're doing really well. So the ventilation strategy is really keeping the house at very safe levels of all these contaminants at all times. I mentioned I measure for energy, and I use an e-gauge system. There'll be more slides on that in a moment, but as you can see here, we look at the energy consumption for the ventilation. And, when it gets really cold outside, the ventilator does have an active component. There is a preheater in there to keep the core from freezing over. And so that's what I'm showing here on this graph, where during certain months of the year, February this year was actually really cold. And so the preheater kicked in for some periods of time. It modulates that. It uses it as little as possible. So when I say preheater, it's not taking -30 air and warming it to 70. It's just warming it enough so that the machine can do a meaningful heat recovery, which means it might warm it up to, I don't know, -5, -10 or something, so that the machine can then use its passive heat recovery core. And so ventilation is fairly energy efficient here in our house. Well, as far as these machines go, this is pretty much top of the line. So for ventilation, we average about 25 watts of continuous energy use, which is very little. Everything in this day and age comes with an app, as does my ventilator. You can see that on the left. So it keeps a tally of what it's doing currently and what energy it has avoided because of the power of the heat recovery core and things like that. And you can see those numbers, they really add up. I think I snapshotted this early in the year. So this may have been only after a few months of operation, and the system already identified about 8,300 kilowatt hours of savings by means of using a passive heat recovery core. And that's heat that I didn't have to put in my house because I used an intelligent device to do this work for me. Winter comfort. So even on a day like that, this is in Celsius, I apologize, but if you look at outdoor air, it says -26.9. At those temperatures, Fahrenheit and Celsius are about the same. So at negative, 27 Fahrenheit, the supply temperature is 15.6, which, quick math here, we're still at least in the upper 50s, if not low 60s. So the heat recovery from that machine is really, really powerful. It is able to extract that much energy from the exhaust air from my home to pre-warm the incoming air to levels that are perfectly acceptable to live with. I have something like that in my garage as well. This is a bit more geekery, perhaps, as a point source system. So it's not ducted because the garage is one big open room. So we use these little point source heat recovery ventilators. And what's cool about them is they do push-pull. And so they have a little heat recovery core in there, which is that sort of honeycomb looking white thing that you see in that tube on the lower right-hand side. And what happens here is that when it goes into exhaust mode, the warm air being expelled warms up that core. And then the machine, after about a minute and a half, switches to intake mode. And as it sucks air back through that core, it unloads the heat that it has stored back into the airstream. And so this is another way of doing something like that. It's a passive means of heat recovery. And that system is mounted through the wall. It's very simple. So for a garage or a small apartment or an ADU is perfect. By the way, also my heat pump outdoor unit making an appearance here. And so that's all we have for the entire operation. And that does the garage also. There's a second head in there. The thing that I found just stunning is that those little ventilators that I have in the garage, they run on 2 to 3 watts of load. They're actually running off of a doorbell transformer, and they average energy consumption of 2 kilowatt hours a month. So I ventilate my garage and provide it with fresh air, with this little energy expenditure. All right, we'll talk about heating cooling a little bit. So I already told you that in principle, it works like a furnace. And so on the inside, there's just more of that. If you look at that ceiling here, you can see those sets of ductwork there. There's one insulated, one uninsulated. The supply always gets insulated. The return doesn't have to because it moves room temperature air. So we have a traditional trunk and branch system. One of the things that's great about a passive house is you're moving so little heating and cooling around, you can easily put the whole house on a single zone. There's no use for fancy dampers and other things. So this system can be extremely basic. And so that's kind of what this is here. As the passive house functions like a big thermos bottle with super insulation, all you have to do is stir that insides a little bit every once in a while to get an even distribution of heat and cold. So this really looks bog standard. The only thing that we did is we had it aero sealed, which is a treatment that is done because sheet metal is inherently leaky. They blow a sort of starch-based agent. It's a food-grade agent in there that finds all the little imperfections in the ductwork and just clogs them up. And it's a process that you do once and done. And by virtue of doing that, what I can guarantee is that the air that is put into that system actually comes out of the register and doesn't just squirt out in the middle of a wall or the ceiling in the home. Here's another graphic then of that setup. On the lower right-hand side, you see the outdoor unit. This is connected to 2 indoor units, one in my garage, upper right-hand corner, and then the thing we already talked about on the left-hand side. I keep my garage at 50 degrees in the winter. I do not air condition my garage. And so when I later talk about energy numbers, you have to keep that in mind. I'm also heating to a certain extent a 680 square foot garage. The indoor unit has what's called a post heater. That's sort of the little hat on top of it, that last little layer of that cake there. And what this is an electric resistance heater. This runs extremely rarely. So I get a lot of people asking me, well, what if it gets really cold? The heat pump surely can't find any heat in negative 25 Fahrenheit air. And I can tell you, living through these temperatures, it absolutely can and it will. Its efficiency certainly compresses at those times of the year, there's no doubt about it. But it can always find heat and it doesn't shut off. The manufacturers tell you that the machines are good to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, but that's just what they test. They just keep going. And so I've put these in homes for probably a decade now, and we've never had any problems with that. So they just keep soldiering on and do their thing. And so this post heater on the inside, really what it does is every once in a while in the winter, there'll be conditions where the outdoor unit can ice over. There'll be condensation and the heat exchanger will ice over. So then the machine has to use the heat it generates to thaw itself out. And while it's doing that, it can't give me heat for the house. So this heater hat that sits on top of the indoor unit kicks in while the outdoor unit is busy doing its thing. And I can tell you last year when it got really cold there in February, as we established earlier, that was the only time that ever happened for me. And it happened for minutes on the hour. So most of the year, I get the efficiency of the heat pump. I would go so far to say 95% of the year, we're dealing with heat pump, maybe 5% of the year. And I can analyze that further once I have this year's data set. Anyway. I also put in a dehumidifier. We're not doing that for all passive houses. This is more a test bed for me. I wanted to see how often something like that will really be needed and register. And I can tell you that in a load home like mine is, I have very low loads, not just heating, but also cooling. It takes very little to cool this house. The challenge can sometimes be that you reach the cold temperature really quickly, but the machine, the air conditioner hasn't run for a long time and therefore hasn't had an opportunity to dehumidify a lot. And we certainly have encountered a few days where that's been the case. Most often though, the dehumidifier has kicked in on days when it was just like really cloudy and rainy outside. And so I have to owe you the runtime. This is my first year of monitoring. So in 2 weeks, I'll have the set complete and I can start evaluating. But the point is, I've seen this thing come on a handful of days for maybe an hour at a time throughout the year. So it's not something that's required, but I'm learning a little bit from its behavior in my home. And there's going to be a certain client that is more discerning, and that's where we might install that. But for most people, and actually this was the first passive house where we put one in, and I've never had a client call me back and say, it's too humid in my passive house, we need this. So. Again, on the right-hand side, on the next slide here is what I meant to say. You can see me tracking that. One thing of note is I've since switched from an ecobee thermostat to using I have a smart backbone that I use for some other things, and then going to that for controlling stuff in my home. I'm a geek at heart, so I'll play with some of these things, but the ecobee did really well. And so if you're looking to get a heat pump, I can tell you from working with ecobee, it worked perfect. with our Mitsubishi heat pump, even though it's an aftermarket and Mitsubishi has other units that they would sell you, but it worked, and I was pretty happy with that. And so you don't have to buy the manufacturer's unit if you don't want to, and you can use something like an ecobee. There's a couple of things that happen to the plumbing in a passive house as well. So we want to use energy sparingly. So the first thing that we do is we insulate all water lines, cold and hot. Why? Well, the cold water lines, what can happen here is when the house has more humidity in it, they can condense out. So this is more of a practical consideration. We don't want water dripping off of cold water lines in the walls, in the ceilings. The hot water lines is a different story. So we make hot water with a device. And the whole reason why we make it is because when we open the tap, we want hot water on our face, on our bodies, on our hands. So we need to get that precious energy from the machine to the tap. If we don't insulate the water lines, what are we doing? We're building a radiator. We're heating the house with circulating hot water. So in a passive house, all hot water lines are end-to-end insulated to deliver that precious energy from the water heater directly to the tap without it heating the home in the process. It would also be counterintuitive because my house needs so little heat that at certain times of the year, I'd have to cool against that. And the case in point is at the end of the year here, we've used a little over 600 kilowatt hours to make hot water for a family of 4 in a COVID year when everything was done in the home. And that's pretty phenomenal. And it's a two-part. One, using a heat pump system that pilfers a little bit of indoor temperature, and the other one is making a plumbing tree that's highly efficient. Last piece to the puzzle, right in the middle, that shiny looking thing, wastewater heat recovery unit. So what the heck is that, you might think? Well, it's a piece of plumbing pipe made from copper with a copper pipe wrapped around it. And what this does is when we take showers, the hot water that goes down the drain warms up that copper tube, and the thing that snakes around it is the water that goes from the water service to the hot water heater. So this passively preheats the cold city water on its way to the water heater, and thereby significantly reduces the amount of work that the water heater has to do. It's an extremely simple device. Again, we're building a passive house. We're trying to do it in passive means and stuff like that. No moving parts, will virtually last forever. One-time investment, and you reduce your hot water bills by perhaps as much as 50%. So just some data on that. I won't bore you with. I know you want to see the data, so maybe I should rephrase that. But we're averaging less than 2 kilowatt hours per day. I guess I made that point already. So we have right now about 650 kilowatt hours. All right. So back to the home, it was wrapped up, packaged up on the outside with building paper. Ours is black, so think of that as a black version of Tyvek. It's all sealed up. The strapping that you see, those lighter lines, that's furring. So our siding is stood off the building. That's a technique that also should be mandated, is not in Minnesota, but should be. It's a building science measure that makes your siding and your building last a lot longer. So we did this deliberately and everywhere. You can see it sometimes vertical, sometimes horizontal. That has something to do with the siding material that ultimately went over the top of it. So that's kind of the box, all weatherproofed. And really, in this scenario, we have a 2-layer defense mechanism here, which from the sounds of it, I think is being tested right now. So we have the siding itself, and then we have the building paper completely sealed up behind it. So should the siding ever let anything through, it would be shed by this second skin. That's how it's put around the windows. And on the right-hand side there, what you're looking at, that hole, that cavity is actually where our shade boxes got installed. I have a whole little blurb here on shades too that I'll show you in a second. So let's build the house out. Standard stuff, we got stud walls. We ended up putting a wood fiber board on it for some acoustics. We wanted it to be a quiet home. When you have 20-inch thick walls with insulation and the roof and everything else and triple pane German-made windows, it is dead silent in here. So we didn't want to drive each other nuts. So the whole house is soundproofed. In this picture, you can also see, one of the tubes going to the ventilation system. And then earlier I had talked about how our ceilings are furred down so that when we do mechanics like that up there, we're not weaving in and out of the airtight building envelope. So other than the plumbing stack and the connection to the PV panels, there really isn't anything that goes through that layer. Main floor. All the interior insulation you see there is sound insulation. And then we use that wood fiber board again, which is sort of a break for some of the acoustics. Then we go drywall. This is actually a great shot because it also shows you one of those high performance windows open. These are tilt and turns. They come into the inside and they basically have 3 layers of gaskets for weather and air tightness. So they seal extremely well. If any of you are looking at me on the screen, hello, I'm right next to one of those windows. They also tilt. I don't know if you caught that. I can do this a couple of times here. Boom. So they open and close like that for a ventilation position. So they tip in at the top if you just want air. And the beauty of that is they're not opening to the outside, so you're not putting them in the weather. All right, so another piece of the puzzle, no or low VOC paints. And by extrapolation, this is true for flooring products, cabinetry, and other things we brought in here. We're in an airtight environment, and really most buildings are on one level or another. And so we don't want to burden ourselves with chemicals. And so that's something that as a company, I've always paid great attention to. So no off-gassing from the stuff that we bring into the house. Couple of other things. I know you like the geeky stuff too. So we have flush LED strip lighting on both floors, not in every room, but this is just where lighting is going in this day and age. So rather than doing a bunch of can lights or pot lights, we now have these things that you can either let into material like wood on the lower level, or you can drywall up to. And so here's some construction impressions of those things. Just from the architecture and nice to have side, we have railings made from glass. So it gets a little exciting when you're on the second floor looking down. You're basically, seems like there's nothing separating you from the fall. And that's just sort of a little moment of enjoyment and excitement. Here you can see the stairwell right of the front door from the bottom and the top, and that LED completed. So that gives you an idea of what something that like that looks like. And it just gives fantastic lighting. It's even, it's everywhere. So going up and down the stairs, you know, it's just superior over having these hot spots from can lights. Another thing to highlight, we were talking about resource efficiency and good building materials. All the wood you see is reclaimed ash from wood from the hood. So Minneapolis has to take down all its ash trees. They give it to wood from the hood. They turn it into useful building materials. And so we made our ceilings and our stairs from that. So here's a couple more impressions on the lower level. I keep coming back to that shot seemingly. I guess the other one was horizontal. Here in the vertical, you can see the second interior balcony on the right-hand side. All right, so then just to complete the story of the house being built, showers go in, tile goes in. We have 0-step showers. Again, I talked about making age in place type buildings. Why is that important? Well, if a building isn't useful to its inhabitants, there's no point in having it. People won't love it. They won't care for it. They'll be aggravated by it. Again, we want to be part of the solution. And that's not just energy and carbon. That's also giving people a fair chance if they have trouble getting around. So the house is accessible in that way. Some of the finished product shots here of the bathrooms, you can see that shower there, so you can walk right in. And another piece of that puzzle here was that we waterproofed and tiled the entire thing. You know, having lived for 18 years with drywall in the bathroom, I swore never again. And there are materials that are appropriate in that setting and others that are not. And so case in point that we also don't have a shower curtain, so there's no more moldy mess. As a matter of fact, we just have these glass pieces and the opening big enough so you can easily get in and out. There's nothing to open and close at all. You just kind of walk in there, get showered, and come back out. That's a guest bath on the main floor. Same sort of concept, different materiality. Flooring is another one of those materials that can be a really bad offender for off-gassing. So we used a cork product that came with a bunch of environmental certificates, and cork in general is a very environmentally friendly material. And this is on all floors with the exception of where we have tile. All right, and then we got to move in the first coffee and my kids, you know, eating pizza. So that was a good day. We moved in on the first day of lockdown last year. So you can imagine how exciting that all was, and trying to find somebody to help us move. Nobody. All right, I'll talk about the siding real quick, and then we'll wrap up the tour. So we have a blend of cedar siding from northern Minnesota that we got from somebody who milled that up there, that is stained. So it's a completely natural material. And again, it's a carbon storage because wood always is. We even put that on our garage door because, again, we didn't want to call a lot of attention to that, so it blends right in. It's installed over this ventilation cavity I talked to you about, and that, again, extends the useful life of the product. So you can see that all coming together. The ash ceiling goes all the way out to the front porch and the rear porch. And then we use steel. We use it a lot in our firm simply because people don't like maintenance. I don't like maintenance. Steel properly installed has a 100-year maintenance cycle. There's no caulks, no paints, nothing like that. So once you put this up, it's essentially fire and forget. And so that's what we do. It's not a shipping container. Many people have asked. It would be too large for that. So sorry to burst your bubble if you thought we build shipping containers. But yeah, it's corrugated metal, and it comes in many ways, different shapes, sizes, colors. We opted for this sort of black and white with those blue window frames there in the middle color scheme. So you can see that all being installed. It goes up rather quickly in these large sheets. All right, so then we'll top it off with the shades. So I already told you that I have exterior shades on the home. You may have seen them show up here and there and everywhere. And that is because this is a passive solar house. So the house effectively is a solar collector. It collects sun energy. So I have to manage that somehow, right? And so we do that with the help of shades, and they need to be controlled somehow. So we have a minimal amount of automation in this house. It doesn't have to be that way. I have some clients who have literally wall switches up and down, and that's all it'll ever be, and that's fine. So we opted for a minimal automation with this thing called the Loxone mini server, which you see here, which is literally smaller than my hand. And it runs a base program based off of different sensors throughout. There's a weather station up on the roof, and then I have some thermostats throughout the home. And based on that, and knowing what the weather forecast is and some other stuff, it can make some choices for us as to when to put these shades down and to articulate them. In this picture, you can see all the parts of the puzzle. So upper left-hand side is one of those shades still wrapped up. So there's a rail that it hangs from, and then the shade itself. On the right-hand side is the controller for the shade that just goes into the power feed to it and tells it up or down. The shade doesn't have any intelligence. It can spin the motor one way or another. And then earlier I had told you that above some of the windows we framed in these shade boxes. That's what you see on the lower left. So that's where the shade is actually installed. And then on the right-hand side, we hardwired each shade to one location so we can cut power to it. But then the Loxone mini server wirelessly controls the whole thing. And so let's see if this will play for you. This is just an animated GIF. So hopefully you can see this is a few stills showing them, you know, up, down, articulated. Okay. And so think of these things like mini blinds. You all know what they look like, but these are on the exterior. They're a little bigger, still made from aluminum. And they can articulate, as I mentioned, go up and down. They give you privacy, glare control, darkness when you want it, and they keep the sun seat out. And the Loxone system is even smart enough to understand the prioritization of daylight over heat gain. So we can set it up and say, hey, we want to keep maximum cool, or we want to keep maximum daylight, and it'll articulate them slightly differently. So if you want to get fancy with it, you can, but you wouldn't have to. Again, this would even work off of a simple up and down. All right, so at that point, house is pretty much done. The blower door crew came back. For the passive house standard, we have to take another read. This was slightly corrected afterwards to a 0.22, I believe. This still says 0.23. Every little bit helps, but again, Minnesota standard is 3.0, so we ended up at a fraction less than 10% the leakage that is permitted in our state, and that's good for a passive house. And then we decided, you know, with Excel raising their rates and whatnot, to top it off with PV panels. Not necessary to make a passive house. This is purely us, you know, enjoying ourselves. But we put a 12 kW system on the roof. And I assume many of you will have something like that as well. So you're well familiar with this. On the low slope roof, you're not going to bolt this, to the roof slope or a rack system like that, obviously, but it goes on these runners, or I don't know what you want to call them, these little plastic feet, and then they simply get snapped into place and then weighted down with a ballast block. So it's very basic installation. And yeah, we had roughed in for that. So we had all the cabling already coming up to the roof in one central location, and boom, there it is. And I'm happy to report that, our solar installer was actually aiming fairly low. I think we've already surpassed 13,000 kilowatt hours this year. And I know that over time they'll age, and, not every year is the same, but we're very happy with it. And so that system supplies us. And I should also mention, we are Xcel grid tied, but we're 100% wind power, have been since that plant's been available in our old property. This has been wind power even during construction. So again, coming back to my gripe about carbon neutrality, that's what this looks like, right? We minimize the amount of energy we use for anything, and then the little bit that we need, we get out of these sources. So 12,000 kilowatt hours a year, we're at about net zero, so that equals about what we consume here. And again, when the sun's not shining, we're getting 100% wind, both of them being carbon neutral. So checkbox right there. There's the inside of that. You can see the eGauge monitor box up in the corner. So there's one in the house, one in the garage. Together, they monitor the whole setup. And Yuka asked me to show you that as well, which I'll do in a hot second here, to give you a live view of what that thing is doing. And then I'll just talk for a moment about certification. So the Passive House Building Energy Standard is voluntary, obviously, and it is third-party certifiable. You don't have to do that. We do that on about half of our projects. I did that obviously for myself, and this just means that a third party reviewed the entire project in minute detail and then issues you a certificate and a plaque. Why does this matter, you may ask? It matters for things like appraisal. It will likely also matter in the future, where real estate listings will start to include these items, whether there is a certificate or not. And it is also thinkable, and I think fairly likely, that in the future we will have tax situations connected with this, where, because this is a testament to the fact that your building opts out of pollution. So if we're trying to get on top of our clean grid and all the costs associated with this transition away from carbon-laden fuels, somebody's going to have to hold that bag and pay for that. And a certificate like that and the performance of a passive house will allow us to, on record, opt out of that. Yeah, just a couple of impressions here then. Again, hopefully at some point, maybe in the summer, we can do bigger tours again. We've done a couple of smaller tours. I love having people over and showing it to them in the flesh. I'm thankful that I can do it this way for you tonight. There's our outdoor room in the backyard. We spent a lot of time out there this year for obvious reasons. So that was that. And then last but not least, here's the energy dashboard. Is that coming across, Yuka?
Yes, we can see it very clearly here.
Okay, perfect. So he asked me to show that to you. So I built a dashboard from eGauge. So for all the nerds out there, I monitor just about every circuit and then group them in meaningful groups of consumers so that they tell me something. And I monitor usually on the fly what you see here. So I have the first graphic in the upper left-hand corner is just a flow of electricity. So at the moment, obviously, the sun is set. So we're pulling from the grid, and then the little bit that goes to the PV panels is really the standby load for the inverter. Then all the little dials next to it are things that I made to show me on the fly what anything in the house is drawing, things like cooking, dishwashing, hot water. So you can see right now in my home, my network is pulling electricity. I'm sitting on 600 watts of plug loads, which is anything that's in a jack or lights. My media center is pulling 100 watts because the rest of my family is watching Downton Abbey next door. And the refrigerator is on standby at 5 watts. My ventilation system is drawing 37 watts. So this is extremely powerful for me as a practitioner because I learn a lot from this about how things behave and where loads are. And if we want to minimize loads and conserve energy, it starts with understanding where it is. It's like going to the doctor. They can't just look you in the eye. They have to do some testing and x-rays and whatnot to know what the heck is going on. This is the same thing. And then on the lower left hand, I have my annual, graph. I can set this up for anything really. I could show you the last hour. You're just going to see consumption. The last month, you can see the green, which is production, is already waning, obviously, as we approach winter solstice. Last 3 months, so you can see there's a lot more going on. And then on the lower right-hand corner are my annuals. So this is not so much, I'm not a big net zero nut, so I don't really care about that too much. But again, grouping the other consumers together and seeing what impact they have over the course of the year. So for those of you with the electric cars, you can see mine took about 2,446 kilowatt hours out of me. And so if I take the car off of my usage of currently 13,000, I'm sitting at about 10,500 kilowatt hours for the entire operation here. And so at 12,780 in production, the home itself is well into the net zero territory. As a matter of fact, I'm very close at being able to do the house and one vehicle off the roof, which in Minnesota is a tall order. You can also see, and I don't know if any of you have a comparison, but heating and cooling total 3,500 kilowatt hours. This is, perhaps I would say 80 to 90% reduction in this category alone over the status quo. As I mentioned earlier, on a really cold day, I can heat the house with 2 hairdryers going at the same time. So my heat pump actually has a maximum capacity of 3.4 kilowatts. That's it. And we've never been cold in here. So actually, right now, I have the window open because I'm hot. All right. I think this concludes the walkthrough. And so our main course, thank you for enduring. I know that was a ton of information in a very short period of time. And I know I can talk a mile a minute. I love my work. I'm passionate about it. And so I will shut up now and listen for Yuka's question and see if I can help you.
Well, thank you, Tim. I mean, that's just amazing of all the stuff that you have there and all the things that you're sharing with us. It's really amazing stuff. And I mean, this group has a ton of people who are geeking on everything. And I don't know that any of us has done anything even close to that detail when it comes to the home smarts and all the controls. So, and all the little details that you shared with us are also really interesting. It's like, all right, that's how you can do it. I never thought about it that way. So we have plenty of questions here, and I'm sure when we open this up to everyone. But before we go into having people to ask more detailed question, there's already some very detailed question in chat. Some of the bigger question categories that I'm seeing right now is the retrofit. How do you do this into existing house? So could you give us a little bit of understanding of what this looks like in a house that exists already?
The best thing, let me hang on 1 second here. I got to pull something up on my screen, and then I will switch back to screen sharing. I have a lot of answers for that, more than we'll have time for. So the first, hang on, one thing after the next. Let me share this. Boom.
Yep.
There. Okay. So if any of you are interested for a deeper dive, go to my website at testudio.com. And then on the main page, when you scroll down, if you really want to do a deep dive on retrofits, find a project called the Minifit House. It's sort of in the middle on the right-hand side, and click on that. And when you're on the page for that building, you can see before and after shots. There is a YouTube on there that's like an hour or something long, where I explain in nitty-gritty detail how we took this shitbox, that's a technical term, from 1935 and turned it into an absolute stunning super performer. By the way, this thing is the first certified passive house in Minneapolis, or in the Twin Cities, period. Also, my partner, who's now retired, designed the very first in all of the Americas. So we've been doing this a long time. We have a lot of experience with it. And so my life can be pretty exciting. I get to do a lot of firsts and break a lot of molds. And this was one of them. This actually ended up being the first cold climate passive house retrofit anywhere. I worked with the Passive House Institute in Darmstadt on this. And we did this, I think, in 2012. It's in South Minneapolis on Lake Nokomis. The owners are super nice. They also have opened this up to the public many times. Just with COVID, it's been tough, but maybe a quick plug. Twice a year, if you want to see a passive house, look for something called the Passive House Open Days. They happen in June and in November. And we typically try to get at least one, if not multiple, local projects to open their doors. It's basically just an open house, free for all. And so I've done this for 13 years on the trot since they came out with that program. So if you ever want to see something and talk to people, that would be the day to do it. But short of me telling you exactly how we did it, some of the principles you saw, that second wall that got put on the building and stuff like that, there's some pictures here, works the same way in a retrofit. We took the skin off, the siding off. This building also had a broken roof, so it needed a new roof. Not all of them do. But we took that off and then we rebuilt it out from there. That's really how that worked. It has the same heat recovery ventilation in it. And then it got reskinned, recladded, similar window to what I showed you here, similar wall thickness, similar insulation techniques. And as you can see here, EnerFit, which is the passive house retrofit, is called EnerFit pilot project. Go to that website, check it out.
All right, excellent. Well, that's very, very good, and it's good to have that kind of resource where people can just go and check it out. Those who are interested, because again, as you said, we could easily talk many more hours about this, but we have limited time frame here. Yeah. The other thing that has really come up here, and I think when I spoke with you earlier about this, you said that that's a very common question that you get is the money part of the thing. Mm-hmm. How much do these things cost? How do you make them as affordable as possible, and all of that? So can you share us some information about that?
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to. So, I mean, first of all, I was able to build one. You don't know me, but that should tell you something. So the good news is that a lot of it is not that different from standard construction. So, pricing it is not that difficult. There are some things that are more, which, when you build a second wall or buy a really good window, that simply costs more. The point here is, though, that similar to buying a solar panel, what happens there is you make an investment, right? That's not just money you're throwing in the wind. That money goes towards something, and that something is you're paying your utility bill for forever forward with it. I can tell you that I work on projects big and small. I do multi-million-dollar custom homes, but I also work here in Minneapolis on affordable housing projects. We actually have one under construction right now in Northeast Minneapolis. And so I see this on the smallest of small and cheapest and most basic of basic, and I see it on the lavish. And what I will tell you is that if you're building $1 million plus home, generally, I would tell you that the passive house stuff really doesn't cost anything, because clients who build in that price range typically overbuild. They build better than code, and the builders they will associate with do that also. So if you're already building a better wall, you're buying a better window, you're putting heat recovery ventilation in, it is a small and most of the time negligible step to go from there to passive house. On the opposite side of the spectrum, for the affordable housing here in Minneapolis, we had to do a whole track of case studies and investigation. And we found that on these houses where everything is rock bottom construction, we found about a 15% cost increase or investment, which is really the better term, to take the code normal box and upgrade it to a passive house. And in hard dollars, this was done about 2 years ago. I think the cost difference between those two projects was on the order of like $45,000, something like that. So it's a Tesla Model 3. Maybe not, they keep getting more expensive by the day. But so the point being, that's about what that is. And then for that, you lock into this performance level for the life of the building, right? And that's how this ticks. We've done return on investment calculations. I've done that for anything from 1,000 square foot home to high-rise buildings. And we find in residential, they're typically about 12-year break-even points under current market conditions. Now, Excel raising their rates 20% in the next 2 years will shorten that. They do it again, it'll shorten that again. You follow my train of thought there. So that's roughly where the cost structure is for new. Retrofitting, completely different story. It can be anything, because retrofitting means in most cases, you're not just making the building better, but you also have to deal with what's broken. And that's been a challenge here in Minnesota because we have a fairly old housing stock and they weren't necessarily built to last. And so oftentimes we're faced with buildings where the siding comes off and half the walls are rotted out. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to have to repair that. Or the homeowner's already decided kitchen isn't working, bathroom isn't working, need an addition, basement is always wet, right? So when you're doing a big project like this, these other things creep in. And the dilemma that I have is that you never get to do a pure one. They're never pure. So we don't really have a lot of good anecdotal information about the pure cost of the retrofit because they all have repair and improvement components to them. And so that's where I would tell you, you have to look at that individually and look at your building to see what that might be for you. And the last thing I will say to the retrofit is that that is not for every building that we currently have in the state of Minnesota, because some of the substance of the buildings that we have is so poor, or they are so worn that it simply won't be worth it to retrofit them. You can fix anything, but for you car people, think of it as somebody gives you a barn find Model T and says, I want to drive away tomorrow in a Tesla. And you can imagine that there is a project in there somewhere where you can take that Tesla drivetrain and plug it into that Model T and come out with something really cool, right? But if that Model T's frame is already rusted to hell and everything else is falling apart, you got to ask yourself, at some point it's easier for me to custom make a Model T and do all those things than to try to repair the one I was given. And that is a slippery slope, especially for residential buildings in the metro or in other parts of Minnesota. And I would say, there's a good percentage, maybe 30% of the buildings that clients bring to me are at a point where I don't recommend a retrofit or further investment because of the state of the structure.
Yeah. That's good. And there was a follow-up to this one is like, could you just retrofit halfway, or do you always have to do the whole thing?
Great question. I'll point to my website again because there's also some frequently asked questions on there and a whole page dedicated to retrofitting on top of that slideshow. But I want to tell you, so you can do anything piecemeal. And there is a program from the Passive House Institute that's called Step-by-Step Retrofitting. However, that is really more geared towards larger structures. In my personal experience, retrofitting or piecemealing something as small as a single family home is A, not economical, B, aggravating, and C, leads to undesired interim conditions. So I personally, in my firm, will tell people I don't engage in that because I don't think that it makes fiscal sense. I think it's, as a process, frustrating for the people involved. And I've also found that even if designed in that way, let's say you're doing one thing today and then you're saying, I'm going to do this other thing next year or in 2 years from now. If you engage a builder, how do they know that you will follow through with that? And so they really can't leave you with a half a project of anything because it's their liability, right? And so they have to complete the exterior skin or the siding or something like that. You can't just leave a part off. And so in that sense, I think if you're smart, if you can't do it now, you're gonna save your money until you can do it all at once. One hit, elevate the whole building to the right level, walk away, enjoy yourself. That would be a big, big recommendation from me. And I've personally done that work. I retrofit an old home that I owned across the street, and I've gone through the agony and the turmoil and the upset and the debris and the mess and the air contamination and all this other stuff. So I'm speaking to you there, not just as an architect, but also as somebody who's lived through that. I've done a couple of buildings in that fashion. And so I would tell you, if you can afford it, don't do that to yourself. Do it once, do it right, get it to where it needs to be, enjoy it. Also keep in mind that the savings that are meant to pay for the investment, they come upon completion. If you leave something off, let's say you do a good wall, but not good windows, you're not getting all the savings, right? So you're not getting this payback. Construction only ever gets more expensive and none of us live forever. So at some point you got to ask yourself too, I want to enjoy the comfort, and Passive House has incredible comfort. I want to get the resilience. And the further you push that out by doing step by step, the less years you'll get to enjoy it. And so you can tell I get pretty passionate about that, because I've seen this approach of piecemealing too often, and I don't see it working. And so if you're asking me flat out, I would tell you, don't do that. Do it once, do it right, enjoy it.
Well, that's great. I will here do just a time check. We are at 8 o'clock right now. We have set up the meeting originally to be at 8:30. And I don't have too many updates on myself. I'm actually just going to right now tell about tomorrow's EV Outlook virtual happy hour. Those of you interested in it, it's starting at 5 p.m. We'll be talking about what's happening in the EV market and what will come in the next year. Just do all kinds of funny speculations. We'll see what kind of things I come up with before tomorrow at that time, and you'll hear also from Fresh Energy about the federal level things that are happening and other things. So it's going to be very good. But I'll put the link right now to the chat. So use that link to register if you haven't registered yet, if you're interested in joining us tomorrow. So that was just my update on upcoming events. We, of course, don't have too many things coming up this time of the year. If anyone has any announcements or other upcoming events right now, let's go through those. And then I want to go back to Tim's Q&A portion here to give him as much time as possible for this, because I know that there's plenty of interest in hearing more about it. Does anyone have anything that they have coming up they want to share right now or anything like that? If not, you can just unmute yourself and say if you have anything.
I do.
Yes.
Yuka.
Yeah,
I'd like to
go
know
ahead.
about doors. Can you talk about doors, Tim?
Oh, yeah. We'll go to Q&A back here. This was actually about upcoming EV events here.
I'm sorry.
No problem, but we'll definitely make sure that we go to your question about doors here. EV events coming up or anything related to EV world that you want to just share with group right now. Okay, I don't see anything. We'll go back to the Q&A. So from my perspective, I'm happy we'll spend the next half an hour talking about this in that way. So let's get back to the questions. We'll keep Don's door thing here also in mind, but we've been talking about the construction. I want to go back to one thing that has popped up from a couple questions, and that is about working with contractors. Mm-hmm. Is it hard to find contractors? How to find people who actually know how to do this stuff, and do they tend to charge extra because they don't necessarily know themselves how this is done? This might be the first time they're working on some of the HVAC systems and so forth. So that's those are the things that people are interested in learning more.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about that. So the first thing I would note there is it helps to have somebody on your team who understands Passive House if you're looking to go down that route. It can certainly be a builder. It can be a designer, it can be an engineer, it can be some kind of a consultant. I find most economically on the residential scale projects, it is an architect because again, there's usually other things that are being improved if it's an existing home, or if you're designing one from scratch, that needs to be done anyways. So that's helpful. It's not required, but it is helpful. And then on the builder side, so we see more and more builders getting training for this. There's training out there, both for professionals like myself, also for vendors and for builders. And so that's a good thing. However, in my career, I've done pretty much all of my Passive House projects with builders who had never done anything like that in their career. And I don't think that's been an obstacle ever. If somebody knows how to build, they certainly know how to build a Passive House. They just need to be guided. So I think in principle, it's not necessary to find somebody who's done 15 Passive House buildings or anything like that. But I would say that in the next, let's say 5 years, we'll probably be able to have those builders. And I do think that that's going to be helpful and speed things up and maybe help a little bit with some of the cost as well. And so that's the other thing I was going to say, when we were talking about money earlier and the cost, you got to keep in mind that I would say even to this date, most of these are one-offs and pilot projects. So when I tell you that in a worst case scenario, it might be 10 or 15% additional investment, that's under those conditions where materials sometimes get imported and builders haven't had formal training. In markets where Passive House has been around longer, I don't think I said that Passive House has been a standard since 91. So we're actually, this year we had the 30th anniversary of the building standard. So there are countries who've been using this for 30 years. And in those countries, they see anywhere from 0 to 3% cost difference between the status quo and a Passive House. So arguably nothing. So then finding builders, yeah, it really hasn't been an issue. Again, we find people who are good builders and then we build a Passive House with them. I would tell you too that, the most important thing about any builder is that you as a client trust them and you understand how they do business. If you don't have that, then that's not going to be a happy relationship. And to me, that's like number one. From there, we dial down to, trade skill and trade craft and things like that. And again, somebody like myself or colleagues of mine who are well esteemed in this, we can help these people get there. That's not a problem. I can solve supply chain issues for them. We actually just last week, we did a workshop in Northeast at that Passive House where we brought in vendors that showed how to properly install and air seal a Passive House window into that building. And actually next Monday, we have that as a public session. Monday at 11, there's a public workshop offered. Same people coming back to offer to anybody who wants to see how that's done to do that. And so these things can come into play to help elevate people's games. I don't know. There was maybe more, Yuka. Help me out.
Oh, that's very good. That's very good. I'm going to more detailed questions here. There have been actually a couple of questions. First of all, about your clothes dryer. What's the make and model?
It's a Whirlpool. Forgive me. I think what is the model? If you go to Whirlpool's website and you look for heat pump as a keyword, it'll spit out 2 or 3 models that they have. You can also buy these from Miele, from Bosch, from LG, I believe. So most of the dryer companies are now transitioning to the heat pump technology. It'll replace the gas and the condensing dryers.
Yeah, and was that a 240 volt dryer that you put in there?
It is. I think for the main reason, because it has a heat pump, so it has spikes. I mean, the funny part, and I didn't show you this in any level of detail, but, my house, like any home, has a 200 amp service, and I have about 40 or 50 breakers in the box because energy code stipulates that, a house is wired in this way. And the thing that's ridiculous about it is I don't have anything in this house that consumes any significant amount of electricity, but it's wired like mission control. My ventilator is also 240 volts where it draws typically about 25 watts. So the weather is really turning, guys. I don't know if anybody's getting that, but we're getting pummeled right now.
Yep, that's what I've been hearing from some others. It's pretty okay here still in Highland Park, but some of the others are seeing more weather. One thing about the heat pump water or the clothes dryers, I looked into that too a little bit. I haven't made a switch yet, but I learned that Miele has a one model that is 120 volt. So it's for those who have a limited power capacity, like in my case, in my house side, because of everything else, the 120 option, Miele has the 120 option. So that's
theirs can be smaller, so that the only caveat might
true.
be they do the Euro size machines that are slightly smaller drum size and housing. But that's one thing to note with the full size heat pump dryers. They are big. That Whirlpool unit that I have up there, I think is 2'7" deep or something like that. So they are a little clunkier than some of the other units I've seen out there. But the matching washer has the same size, so you can still make a matching pair. But just keep that in mind when you go to that technology. On the flip side, of course, you don't need that dreaded dryer vent mess that is never properly installed and in the worst case becomes a fire hazard. So.
And there was a question, does it take way longer to dry clothes in a heat pump dryer? And I know that it takes somewhat longer, but what's your experience?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
It depends on what your baseline is, but not compared to other dryers that I've used. So there might be another version of this out there that is faster than what we have. It also, similarly to the water heater, it has energy saver and power modes. So you can, at the expense of a little bit more electricity, you can speed up the time if you need to in a pinch. I would say the main pain point of that machine for my family is it has 2 air filters, not just one, or 2 lint filters. And also, even though it has those lint filters, we find, and it says that in the manual, to be fair, about every 2 years, you need to take the housing off and clean the heat exchanger. And that might be true for a lot of dryers. It's just that people never do it. We just found that when it slows, if there is a slowdown, then it's usually related to that. And then we later learned you can actually look inside of it behind one of the filters and you can see the heat exchanger. And you can see that even with the filter over a course, again, family of 4 with kids, we use it a lot. But after about 2 years, it needs to be cleaned on the interior, which isn't a big deal, but it's just something that needs to be done. Yeah.
Yep. There have been 2 questions at least which ask, with no basement, do you have a storm shelter?
Yeah, we fortified our mudroom. I hope we don't have to use it tonight, but we did. And that, again, has nothing to do with a passive house. That was just a preference. We had a basement in our old house, never used it, decided not to build one at the new location. And that's really where that came from. And so I've done this for a number of clients now where we've taken interior rooms without windows and fortified them with, additional layers. And that's what we did here. Yeah.
Good. All right. Well, maybe we should go on to the Pran's question about doors. Do you have any information about the doors that you want to share with us?
Yeah, the doors are like the windows, and they actually come from the same manufacturers typically. So the exterior door is essentially the same as a window, just with a leaf instead of the sash with a glass in it. There's not a whole lot more to it. So you would buy that from the same company that supplies you the passive house window. And the only exception to that at the moment is garage door. If you have an attached garage, you need to put a fire rated door in there. And so we cannot use those imported doors for that because they're lacking the UL listing stamp here in the United States. So those doors, we just use regular insulated American doors, which has been fine. If you have an attached garage, more often than not, at least in contemporary construction, those garages are insulated also.
Yep, that's good. There has been some questions about using a air source heating here. How about using a ground source heat?
Yeah, fair question. And I think I said that in the small breakout group, but I forgot to reiterate it. The ground source systems are simply overkill for a single family passive house. The heat load in a building like mine is so small, and the energy consumption, you saw that currently we've used for heating and air conditioning this year 3,500 kilowatt hours. I can tell you about 2,000, maybe 2,300 of that was heating, and a little over 1,000 is cooling. And so for that, let's say the ground source heat pump is twice as efficient as the regular heat pump, right? So if you pay that outright to Xcel, my heating bill in any given year is something like $300. But the heating system I installed, if we're looking at the hardware now, is maybe a $4,000 package. If I go to a ground source heat pump, I'm looking at a minimum of probably $30,000 for a system like that. And so there's just no return on that. And so for smaller units like single family homes, they're not economical. And additionally, they're geared towards higher consumption. So they're actually in the marketplace. You will not find a ground source heat pump small enough so it's suitable for a passive house like mine with the loads that I shared with you. So there's a number of reasons why we don't do it. I've done 2 of them, and they've both been on larger developments. We did one on a home that was 5,000 square feet, so about 2.5 times the size of mine. And we did it there because they also were using a loop from that for a barn. And so it was doing the house and the barn, and that made a lot of sense because they had process loads in the barn. But yeah, for a single family home, it is simply not needed.
Yeah. So it's just a simplicity is if you make your house energy efficient enough, then you don't necessarily need the whole capacity of something like that. And
you also don't need a smart thermostat. you also don't need a smart thermostat. You don't need a nighttime setback. You don't need any of those things. You also don't need to worry about when you go on vacation. You know, you can set back your thermostat, but again, given the little energy that is used for heating or cooling here, you got to ask yourself if that's even worth your effort. Sure, for energy, if you want to save the last kilowatt hour, absolutely, and I still do it. But that's kind of the funny part, is that the circle sort of closes, right? So something like a smart thermostat makes a lot of sense if you have an inefficient, leaky building and you want to, you know, trail that curve a little bit and cut off the peaks and whatnot. A passive house takes days to cool off or to heat up all on its own. And so there's really no point in a night setback in that sort of scenario. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good. There have been some questions here, but rather than me going through all the detailed questions here, and some of them you might already have received the answer. How about let's let people just unmute yourself and ask which interesting questions you have, the things that are you find interesting and want to learn more about. So please just unmute yourself and ask a question.
All right, I'll bite. I'm curious, what was the biggest like thing to get used to, the biggest change living in a passive house? The recirculating vent hood, you know, the heat pump dryer. What was the biggest change from a traditional house?
So I've asked my family that because I'm not a fair yardstick. I've been designing passive houses virtually my entire career. And while I haven't lived in one personally, I've been in many. And I actually retrofit my office building to a passive house before I built the home. So I'd already had the pleasure of being in one of them. So when I asked my kids and my wife, you know, one of the things that they said was had the biggest impact or made them feel different the most was all the south-facing glass and the daylight that comes in. We hardly ever turn any lights on in the house. We live with the color of the sky and what the sun has to offer over the course of the day, and what that does to your soul and to you as a person, and especially in Minnesota, where light at certain times of the year can be scarce and plentiful at others. It's profound. And this has nothing to do with energy or equipment. It's just an experience piece when you make the house a passive solar collector and you have a bunch of south-facing glass. And we came out of a house, which is pretty typical in Minneapolis, where most of the windows faced east and west, right? And so we only had sunrise on one side and sunset on the other. And then it was usually glare, because the sun angle is so low. Moving to a home where the sun angle is much more pleasant and the light really floods into the space, and then you get that warmth off of it in the winter. You should see my dog. I can't get that hound away from the windows in the winter. It is just, you know, that big glass out in the dining area. It's also spectacular, I will tell you, to sit at that dining table wearing nothing but a t-shirt when the thermometer says -20 outside, but it's blue sky and the sun is shining. It's just absolutely fantastic. So I would say those things had the biggest impact for me and my family. All the other stuff is just noise, you know. I deal with that with my clients all day long. I can't use a heat pump dryer. I have to have an exhaust vent hood. Sure. All good. And there's a solution for all of you out there for the things that need to be just so, you know, so there's always an answer to that. But for us as a family, you know, it was easy to go to stuff like that with the return of what we get out of it on the flip side, you know, and life is changing. And if you get, I don't know, I presume you're a Tesla driver or another EV, you get into that. It's motoring 2.0, right? When you go back into an old gas guzzler with a stick shift or something, it doesn't feel quite right. And you were happy to let go of that experience for all the benefit you get out of the touchscreen control and all the other benefits that come from driving an EV. And this is no different. And I would actually say that I find that sort of funny a little bit, because with cars, people don't talk about that a lot. With homes, everybody wants to talk about those little changes. But I would argue that the difference between a car 10 years ago and what you might be driving right now is probably a lot more stark than the difference between my house and how it works and any other home that you guys live in. It'll feel differently because of its performance, but I still have light switches. I have door handles. I have a cooktop. You know, we do laundry. So none of this stuff has fundamentally changed at all. It's just better in every single way and cleaner.
Yeah, Good. Excellent. Another question. Who wants to ask? As I said, just please unmute yourself and ask a question.
We're
How do you feel about ICF construction all the way up?
Okay, yep, I heard that. Somebody asked me about ICF construction all the way up. And for those of you who don't know what that is, ICF is what I showed you for how my foundation wall is built. It's these foam blocks that get core filled with concrete. And so I've done entire passive house buildings in ICF. I actually have one in design right now where it's the entire building is built in that way. I can tell you the building methodology like that has virtually no impact on passive house. If that's how you want to build and you want to live in a concrete building, that's perfect. If you want to stick build it like I chose to do, that's fine. Also, if you want to build it from cross-laminated timbers, that's a possibility. Timber frame, it can all be done. So it really comes down to your personal preference of what you want your structure to be. In the background, of course, there is an environmental impact conversation because an ICF is never going to be as green as a wood frame building because we're dealing with a petroleum-based insulation product and concrete, which has a notoriously high embodied energy and carbon footprint. So that's something that we just have to come to terms with. But for certain projects, building in concrete or building in concrete and foam is the right answer because we're still building for people under certain circumstances. People have sensitivities, fears, anxieties, expectations. And to meet those, we go to one or another system. And so, yeah, from where I'm sitting, they're all good. We can make it happen with all of them. I personally chose not to build ICF all the way up because of the environmental footprint of it. I wanted wood construction for that additional benefit because I'm after lowering my entire carbon footprint. And so I minimize the amount of concrete and foam that I used on this project. And I'm actually working really hard to avoid more and more foam products where we can. The American building materials marketplace is extremely conservative and about 30 years behind the global marketplace. So we're a little short on exciting green building materials sometimes, but short of that, yeah, no, it works the same. It can be done, and we have done it, and it's wonderful. The starting slide had an ICF passive house that I showed you. That green box in the background behind the Tesla, that's all ICF.
Okay, that's good. I will ask one question here because I'm getting questions also with the text messages here from people who are watching the YouTube right now. So there's been a question about cost per square foot for affordable housing project.
Yeah, I don't want to answer that because cost per square foot is a complete rabbit hole and it can be meaningful, it can be meaningless. And before I get into that, that's a can of worms. I can tell you that we're currently building affordable housing in Minneapolis within the framework that the city of Minneapolis has created. So I don't want to go into more detail other than telling you that it is happening. It is happening right now. There was also a group that built a FIAS, which is a sort of a similar version of Passive House standard multifamily affordable housing project in Northeast Minneapolis 2 years ago. And Passive House, I can also tell you, has a huge footprint in affordable housing. And the reason being that affordable housing developers most often hold their property for a minimum of 30 years, and they also are on the hook for the entire cost picture. And so therefore, for them, it makes sense because the life cycle costs on a passive house are lower than anything else out there. And so once they understand it, they get in the habit of doing it. And there's countless examples for that. In North America, still a little fledgling, but you go to other parts of the world and you'll find that that has just become the norm.
Okay, good.
Can
Other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask a question that while you're talking about affordable housing, we're looking at doing a project where we have a 10,000 square foot lot near downtown St. Paul. We're looking to use some basically pre-manufactured, not mobile home, but pre-manufactured homes that are about 500 square foot each. And I'm imagining if this was built in a factory, that would be even easier to do this sort of, at least the wall design. I don't know whether site planning, whether we could actually site these things to be passive,
sure,
solar kind of stuff. But Yeah, have you done any of that kind of stuff, prefab or pre-manufactured where you just on a truck to dump it down or walls that come from a factory and you just plop them together on site?
Yes. Yep. I'm in the middle of a project in New Hampshire that is built prefabricated out of a factory. So two things. Maybe the underlying assumption that stick building this in the field is particularly difficult would be incorrect. It's not very difficult to build a house like mine. So from a technical perspective, you could say it's different. So therefore, we need to do it in a factory. I would say, again, I've dealt my entire career with people who had never done anything like that and got them to do it, and it performs. So from where I'm sitting, it's actually not difficult to stick build this at all. So if we take that off the table, we're left with some other benefits of prefabrication, and that is, of course, standardization. There's volume production and cost efficiencies that can come from that. But you're also creating some new problems, right? Because now you have to solve some stuff about the production of it. It has to be transported. It can't fall apart when you transport it, and all sorts of other things like that. So in reality, what I can tell you, Charles, is that in my experience, the prefabrication is a different means to the same end, but it doesn't necessarily, at least not currently in the North American marketplace, give you much cheaper cost if that's what you're after. It can help a little bit in quality control. It changes the timing entirely, right? It's made, and then when it ships within a week, the whole thing is up, is great. So you have to look at it from a slew of benefits, and then look at, does that make sense for your individual project? But it is, I think, all too often portrayed as something we need to do in construction because it'll solve all these things. And the reality hasn't really borne that out just yet. I think it could, if we made buildings like we build cars. It's possible, right? Mass produced like that. But that's also something that isn't currently happening quite on that scale. So there's not a good comparison for it. And also, people want to tweak and modify and change everything about it. And, you can imagine, that's where, again, Ford Model T, you can have it in any color as long as it's black, or let's go to the Cybertruck, any color as long as it's nothing, right? So why are these people doing that? Because they know that if they open up Pandora's box and let you make the Tesla you want to make, it gets complicated, and that complexity trickles down like dominoes, and then it gets more expensive and all this other stuff. So it's a slippery slope. It's not the panacea maybe that some people think it is. It has its place. You can build fantastic multifamily high-rise buildings in panelized pre-construction, and you can certainly do it for single-family homes. And I have good friends who own a prefabrication company, and they do really well with it, and they do beautiful work. There is a place for it, but it doesn't change the picture completely, if that helps.
Okay, good. Well, I have Leif has had his hand up for a little while, so I'll let him ask the next question here.
I have a retrofit question for you.
Go ahead.
Is old enough such that we don't have the same sort of heating everybody else has. Everybody else has forced air. We have radiators.
Sure.
And then years ago, we finally got air conditioning by way of the mini split.
Yeah.
What the problem with this is, you can have a situation like where my daughter has both the radiators running, multiple rooms, and
the air conditioning
in her room turned on at the same time.
Oh.
And nobody that I've ever spoken to has seen a controller that can merge these two together. Have you?
Oh yeah, I'm actually using one. That little thing that I showed you, the Loxone unit that I have.
The ecobee?
No, not the ecobee. My Loxone controller, which controls my shades. That machine or that equipment also does my heating and cooling, and so that unit actually will exclusively heat or cool, not at the same time by design. It will make that impossible.
Can I Google
here's what
Loxone.
Give me Loxone. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to share my screen and show you a graphic here to illustrate what I just said so that you can understand that. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so the little black window that I'm moving around here is actually the interface for my smart controller, right? And so one thing that you can see here very clearly is there is a temperature range at the top where it says zone cooling only and one zone heating only down here. And then there's this thing called zone heating and cooling in the middle. And so I can lock that out where at this point it cools, at this point it heats, and the middle is ignored. So I can force this to only do one or the other so that they can't work against each other. Now, whether you can connect this up to the equipment that you have, I'm the wrong person to ask, but I can tell you with my heat pump that this works. And so that there is a threshold that I can define in there so that I never in the same day or week or season for that matter, heat and cool on the same day against, one another. So, and this in principle could talk to two different heat sources as well. So that doesn't have to, in my case, it's one heat pump it talks to, but in principle, you could connect this up. The interface for it is such that it can talk to these things individually.
Excellent. All right, then we have Ken Henningsen there with the hand up, and then we are starting to run out of time here. Tim, do you want to still stick around for 10 more minutes for the questions, or are we done for 8:30?
No, it's all good. My wife just sent me a subtle little note that says Feierabend, which is the German word for be done with work.
Okay, so then we will not go over. I will let Ken ask one more question, and then we will be done with this.
Just to illustrate, I've had back-to-back meetings. I've been on this thing for 6 hours straight, and she's done with me being done. So
understandable. You have done such a good job for us already here, so there's
all good.
No problem with that. So Ken, go ahead.
This could be another literal rabbit hole, but have you done any earth sheltered passing? Somebody's got a south-facing hill, for instance.
Yeah, so that's a great question. That's where it all started. So I actually visited New Mexico, and I went to the Earthships with my family here not long ago. And that's really part origin of where Passive House came from. We didn't have time today for a history lesson on that, but the Passive House building energy standard came from those early explorations of efficient homes. And a lot of it was informed by work in North America, in particular the Midwest, actually. And it's kind of a shame here and now it's forgotten art that we're sort of clawing back, but we had it once in the late 70s and 80s. There was a lot of exciting work that happened here, a lot of books written on the subject, and the earth sheltered homes were one version of that. So the back end, the north side of it was earth sheltered, and then the south side was glazed and facing the sun. And often there was sort of a growing room, a greenhouse out front that would harness the sun. The thing I will tell you about that is that we don't need to do that anymore. Building technology and programs like Passive House have evolved so much over the last 50 years that we don't have to dig ourselves in the ground anymore to get good insulation value. We can come out of the ground, we can have north-facing windows, even in Minnesota, that perform and give us comfort. And so I haven't done an earth sheltered home. If somebody absolutely needed that in their lives, I would certainly look at it for them. But the point is you don't need it. And if you're spending your hard-earned money on a new home, for most people, they want access to light and air and view and all of that. And I would want to give you that. And so I would try to twist your arm and pull you out of the ground and set you on top of it to get the maximum enjoyment. But to each their own. But it's no longer part of the program. We don't have to do that to provide performance in a building.
All right. Well, that will end the day today. Thank you very much, Tim, for being such generous with your time and your knowledge. And thank your family, too, for letting them to share your time with us tonight. We've already gotten a lot of thanks here on the chat. I don't know if you have had a chat opportunity to check out the chat.
I haven't.
People are like absolutely amazing. Thank you. They've really liked this and feel that they have learned a lot today. So very informational, very good. So excellent. That's great. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm sure you learned a lot and got a lot out of it, and I hope, Tim, also hope to see you in our future meetings too.
Absolutely. I want to do more in that space. And this also doesn't have to be the last engagement. We can certainly rekindle this at some point next year. And like I said, we typically do open houses in the summer. This will all get easier as long as COVID's still around. And so there may be opportunities for you to engage more with the Passive House community. Look for Passive House Minnesota, the Passive House Network. You can look at my website, or Yuka can make links for you if you have further questions or other things you want to talk about. I'm going to take a couple of weeks off here starting next week, just a quick forewarning, but I'll be back at this desk in January and then ready for new shenanigans and anything else. So Merry Christmas and all the best for the new year to all of you. And thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
That's great. I think what we could do next summer potentially is to do a meeting at your place there, check out the place, have the cars outside to do the normal get together in that way. But we'll talk about that next year. Thanks.
One of you gets to charge on my level 2 charger. There you go.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yep. Good night, everybody.
Bye.